you, my best friend. So I want to start off by saying that I'm not all that different than anybody else in this room. Just a Jewish woman living in the valley, going about her business, go to the gym, work, take care of a family. But there is one difference between myself and all of you, and that is that I am a stage 4 breast cancer survivor. So the first time I was diagnosed, I was 49, and I wasn't surprised in the least because my mom had already survived it twice, my sister had it once, and I always felt it was inevitable. So I got was caught on a mammogram. It was very early, it was stage 1, and I opted for a very aggressive treatment, which was a bilateral mastectomy with a tram, which was a wonderful surgical option where they removed both breasts and then took fat from my abdomen and created new breasts. So there was no concern with rejection. It was just me being moved around, and everything was great. They did a test that was pretty new at the time on my cancer, and it told us that there was a very, very, very low risk of it ever coming back. And I had not yet gone through menopause, so my only option for treatment was tamoxifen. So I went on tamoxifen, and at that time, the standard of care was that after you had mastectomies, you no longer needed to get mammograms, but I was told I had a choice, so I continued to get mammograms. 4 years later, I went in for my mammogram. I'd gone every year, and I got the phone call again saying they saw something suspicious. Went back, they did a biopsy, and it was the identical breast cancer in the same breast returned. Then after doing a PET scan, they discovered that it had migrated to my hip. So the idea that if you have bilateral mastectomy, you are done is incorrect, and that's a very important thing that most people don't know. You need to continue to protect and watch them, because the best surgeons in the world, of which I had, can't remove every single shred of breast tissue. They do everything they can, but there can always be a little bit left, and mine came back. At that time, I was tested for the BRCA1 and 2 gene, which came back negative. I have neither one. So then it was decided that I would have a lumpectomy, and a week later I had my ovaries removed because I still hadn't gone through menopause, and it turns out my breast cancer is the estrogen receptor positive, which means that estrogen is the food for my cancer cells. So definitely having ovaries that wouldn't stop working was not to my advantage. So they went, and then I was offered an opportunity to go into a clinical trial. So that was a very new world to me. Did a little reading, discussed it with my family, and discussed it with my doctor. And after finding out that what that means is you will receive no placebos are involved in a phase 1 clinical trial. So you're getting the same exact standard of care that anybody else would, but they're adding something in, which was palbociclib, now known as Ibrance. They continue to scan you and watch you very carefully, and if there was ever any concern or change, you would simply be taken out of the clinical trial. And I want to emphasize that because a few years ago I was being interviewed for a documentary about clinical trials, and I realized that if no one ever volunteered to be in a clinical trial, there'd never be a new drug on the market. And that's a pretty sobering thought. So number one is If you're in a phase 1 clinical trial, there is no such thing as a placebo. And if no one ever takes part in a clinical trial, we'll never get a new drug on the market, and it's important. Another thing I want to mention is, at this point, because it had spread, it was called stage 4. And back in the day, stage 4 meant go home and get your affairs in order, your time is up. But it doesn't mean that anymore. And nowadays, they often refer to it as metastatic breast cancer, which means the same thing. It has spread, but it is certainly far from a death sentence. I enrolled in the clinical trial, and 9 months later, I had my first clean scan, and that was 10 years ago. I'm here today pretty healthy because a doctor that you might know asked a question. He saw a drug on a shelf, wasn't being used for anything, and he said, I wonder. And that's how my drug came into being. So that's an extraordinary lucky draw for me. I would also mention to you that if you are ever diagnosed, that you need to be a member of your team. You need to assemble the right team around you, doctors. I go to acupuncture, I have a trainer. You need to get a team in order, but you must be a member of the team. You can't just sit back and let everybody discuss your case, make the decisions, and do what you're told. It doesn't work like that anymore. There are special programs for daughters who are at higher risk because their parent or grandmothers or aunts were diagnosed with breast cancer, and that's a very important thing for the younger people to know about. My daughters have all gone to wonderful programs through UCLA, but I'm sure they're offered in lots of places. They need to be armed with information, because just like the mammogram is information, so is what they teach them, how to do breast exams and do's and don'ts and lots of important information. I think I would lastly like to say that because of Dr. Finn and the wonderful people at UCLA, I am still enjoying my mom, who's a survivor twice, 94 years old. We recently had the most wonderful weekend ever watching our youngest daughter get married. And I'm literally in the gym 6 days a week, living my life. The only side effect I have ever experienced being on my drug is it lowers my white blood count, which is not a big deal. I'm just careful. And I'm on it for 3 weeks, and I'm off for about 10 days. My numbers come back up, go back on my drug, live my life. So thank you so much.